I never believed in the kind of horror stories you read online, the ones that make you sleep with the lights on, thinking someone, or something, is watching you. But what happened to me a few months ago changed everything. I live in a small, quiet suburb in Ohio. You know the kind: neat lawns, picket fences, kids riding their bikes until dusk, and neighbors who wave as they pass by. That sort of safe, boring environment. Or at least, it used to be boring. It started when we moved into our new house. I had just graduated and was living alone for the first time, trying to embrace independence. Our next-door neighbor was an older man, maybe in his late 60s, with a quiet, reserved demeanor. He didn't talk much, just a nod here and there, a polite smile, and nothing else. At first, I didn't think much of him. People are entitled to their privacy, after all. But as the days passed, I began noticing things that didn't sit right with me. The first incident happened about a week after we moved in. I had been working late, so I didn't notice him standing near his garage until I was unloading my groceries. His eyes followed me in a way that made my skin crawl, not just a casual glance, but a fixed, intense stare. I brushed it off, telling myself it was probably nothing. People stare sometimes, right? But then, over the next few days, I started seeing him more often, always in odd places, peering from his window at night, sitting in his car parked across the street at random hours, even once when I walked my dog early in the morning. There was an intensity in his gaze that made me feel unsafe. One night, I was sitting on my couch, scrolling through Reddit, trying to relax after a long day. The house was quiet, just the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards. Then, I saw him, through the living room window. He was standing in his yard, looking directly at me. But the weirdest part? He wasn't moving. Just standing there, like a statue, eyes locked on mine. I felt my heart pound in my chest. I wanted to yell, but my voice caught in my throat. Then, suddenly, he disappeared. I convinced myself it was a trick of the shadows, the streetlights, or maybe even fatigue. But it didn't stop there. Over the next week, things escalated. Small things at first: doors that were slightly ajar when I swore I'd locked them, objects slightly moved from where I left them, the feeling of someone breathing behind me when I was alone in the house. I tried talking to my friend about it, but he laughed it off, saying I was imagining things because of stress. I wanted to believe him, but deep down, I knew I wasn't. One evening, around midnight, I was taking out the trash. As I stepped outside, I noticed him across the street again, sitting in his car. Only this time, he wasn't just staring. He was holding something. My neighborly paranoia turned into icy fear as I realized he had a notebook and was writing something down, all while watching me. Every little motion I made, every step I took, he was recording it. I slammed the trash can lid and rushed inside, locking every door and window. My heart wouldn't stop racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, somewhere, watching. The next day, I found a note slipped under my door. It was handwritten in a shaky script, almost illegible: "I see you. You're very careful, but I see everything." My stomach dropped. I didn't know what to do. Calling the police felt like an overreaction. They would probably just tell me to stay calm. But staying calm was impossible. The note wasn't just creepy, it was invasive. Someone had been watching me so closely that they knew my patterns, my routines, my exact movements inside my own home. I started keeping my blinds closed all the time, sleeping with the lights on, and even installed a small camera inside the house, hidden in the corner of my living room. I thought that would give me some sense of security. But the camera footage only made things worse. There were times when I would watch the playback and catch fleeting glimpses of him inside my property, just standing in the shadows, motionless, staring directly at the camera. How was he getting in? I hadn't seen any signs of forced entry. And there were nights when the footage showed the front door slightly cracked open, even though I had locked it myself. I decided to confront him. One afternoon, I walked over to his house, heart pounding, hands shaking, ready to demand answers. But when I got there, his lawn was immaculate, his garage door closed, and he was nowhere to be seen. I rang the doorbell, waited, and finally, a neighbor across the street came out to ask if I was okay. I explained everything, but she just looked at me with a strange, sad expression and said, "Honey, he's been like that for years. Always watching. Always writing. But nobody knows why. Everyone just avoids him." Avoids him? My stomach turned. I asked what she meant, and she said, "No one really talks about him. Strange things happen around him. People move away, and nobody knows why. Just avoid him. Stay inside, keep your distance. It's safer that way." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my living room, lights blazing, trying to convince myself that maybe I was just paranoid. But deep down, I knew the truth. He was dangerous, and I was in his sights. A week later, things hit a terrifying peak. I was in bed, scrolling through my phone, when I got a notification from my hidden camera. Motion detected. I ran to the monitor, my hands trembling, and froze. There he was, inside my house. Standing at the foot of my bed. Just staring. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. He lifted his hand slowly and pointed directly at me. I blinked, and he was gone. I called the police that night. They searched my house thoroughly but found nothing. No signs of entry, no footprints, nothing. I felt like I was losing my mind. And then it happened, the thing that changed everything. A package arrived at my door. No return address, just my name in sloppy handwriting. Inside was a small, tattered notebook. I opened it with shaking hands. And that's when I saw it, pages and pages of observations about me, what I ate, when I showered, how I slept, my routines, my friends, even my darkest thoughts I had only shared online in anonymous forums. And on the very last page, written in bold letters, "You can never hide from me. I am your neighbor. Always. I don't live there anymore." I moved as fast as I could, leaving most of my belongings behind. But even now, I can't sleep without checking the shadows, without feeling eyes on me. The worst part? I realized too late that he wasn't just watching my house, he had been watching me my entire life, somehow knowing every detail. And the notebook? It wasn't just for me. It was for whoever he was planning to watch next. Sometimes, late at night, I see him in my dreams, standing in the corner of my room, watching. And when I wake up, I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, just a few houses down, staring, waiting, planning. I don't know how he does it. I don't know why. But I know this, there's no way to stop someone who has been watching for decades. And the terrifying truth is, he could be your neighbor too. I never thought living alone in a city apartment could be terrifying, until it happened to me. I had just moved into a modest building in downtown Chicago. It was an older structure, the kind with creaky floors, narrow hallways, and thin walls that made every whisper from your neighbors audible. At first, I liked it. The rent was cheap, and the location was perfect for my new job. But then, there was the neighbor across the hall. Her name was Mrs. Caldwell, at least that's what her mailbox said. She was an older woman, maybe in her late 60s, with a gentle smile and a soft voice. At first, she seemed harmless, kind even. She would wave whenever we passed each other in the hallway, and once she brought me a plate of cookies, claiming it was her way of welcoming me. I thought she was sweet, even a little lonely, and I smiled politely, grateful for the gesture. But the first strange incident happened within a week. I had come home from work late, carrying groceries, and noticed her apartment door slightly ajar. At first, I didn't think much of it, maybe she had forgotten to close it. But then, I noticed the lights were off inside, and there was a faint sound of someone whispering. My heart raced, and I felt a sudden chill. I knocked on her door, and when she answered, she looked at me with that same gentle smile and said, "Oh, hello dear. Everything's fine." I nodded and stepped back, but the feeling of unease didn't leave me. Over the next few days, I began noticing more odd things. Mrs. Caldwell would always be home, no matter the time of day. She seemed to know when I was leaving for work, when I returned, even when I went out to take out the trash. Sometimes, I would catch glimpses of her watching me through the peephole or the small gap in her curtains. I told myself it was just coincidence, or maybe she was lonely and curious. But it didn't feel right. One night, around midnight, I was sitting in my living room, scrolling through my phone, when I heard a faint knock on my door. My apartment was dark, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I approached cautiously and looked through the peephole. It was her. Mrs. Caldwell. She was smiling, holding a small envelope. I didn't answer. I didn't move. And then she walked away, leaving the envelope in front of my door. My hands shook as I picked it up. Inside was a single piece of paper with one sentence written in elegant, looping handwriting. I know what you do when you're alone. I froze. My first thought was that it was some sort of joke, but my gut told me otherwise. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak, every sound in the building made me jump. I even checked the locks on my door 3 times before finally falling into a restless sleep. The next morning, I decided to confront her. I knocked on her door, trying to sound casual. She opened it, smiling as usual. "Good morning, dear. Isn't it a lovely day?" I forced a smile and asked about the note. She tilted her head, pretending to be confused. "Note? Oh, I don't know what you mean. Perhaps it was the wind?" Her voice was soft, almost musical, but her eyes held a glint that made my skin crawl. Days turned into weeks, and the behavior escalated. I would come home to find small gifts in front of my door, a candle, a flower, sometimes just a note that said, "I'm watching." I tried to ignore it, to convince myself I was overreacting. But one evening, I returned from work and found my apartment door slightly cracked open, even though I was certain I had locked it. My heart pounded as I pushed it open. Everything seemed normal, nothing stolen, nothing moved, but the feeling of being watched was suffocating. I started sleeping with my lights on, installing a small security camera near the door. I wanted proof, something to show the police. But the camera footage only made things worse. On several nights, I would see her in the hallway outside my door, staring at me through the peephole, sometimes pressing her face against it, smiling. On one occasion, I saw her slipping a small camera under my door while I was out. She had been recording me for weeks. I decided to move, but finding an apartment in the city on short notice was difficult. I had a couple of months left on my lease, so I tried to keep my distance from her. I avoided the hallway whenever possible, only went out for necessities, and kept my apartment dark. But no matter what I did, she seemed to know. Sometimes I would find my trash can emptied, my mail sorted, or my personal items rearranged. It was as if she had a sixth sense for my every move. Then, one night, something truly horrifying happened. I was asleep, or at least trying to be, when I heard the soft click of my door unlocking. My heart raced as I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by my bed. The door creaked open slowly, and I froze. There she was, Mrs. Caldwell, standing in the doorway, smiling as if nothing were wrong. "I just wanted to see you," she whispered. My hands shook as I held the bat, unsure if I should strike or run. And then she said something that made my blood run cold. "You've been very entertaining. I've seen everything." I don't remember how I got her out of my apartment that night. Maybe I screamed, maybe I threatened her, maybe it was luck. The police came when a neighbor reported the noise, but when they arrived, she was gone, vanished as if she had never been there. They asked questions, and I told them everything, but without proof, they couldn't do much. I felt trapped, paranoid, and constantly watched. The final straw came one evening when I returned home from work to find a video waiting on my doorstep. A flash drive with a note, "Watch carefully." I plugged it into my laptop, heart pounding. The video was of me, sleeping, sitting at my desk, cooking dinner, even walking down the hallway of my apartment building. It had been filmed from multiple angles, using cameras she had installed everywhere. I realized then that she hadn't just been watching me from across the hall, she had infiltrated every part of my life, turning my home into her theater. I moved out immediately, leaving behind everything I couldn't carry. But even now, years later, I can't shake the feeling that she's still out there, watching, waiting. Sometimes, when I'm in a hotel or visiting a friend, I feel her presence in the shadows. And the thought that chills me the most? She could be across the hall from someone else right now, smiling that same gentle smile, preparing her next performance. I've told my story to friends, to family, even anonymously online, hoping someone might understand. But people dismiss it, saying it's impossible, that it's a figment of my imagination. Maybe it is. Maybe I'm just crazy. But deep down, I know the truth. There are neighbors out there who are far closer than we ever realize, watching, learning, waiting. And sometimes, the most terrifying people aren't strangers, they live right across the hall. I never thought I'd experience something that made me question reality until I moved into my first apartment in suburban Portland. The building was an old, 3-story brick complex, quiet and unassuming. It had character, creaky wooden floors, narrow hallways, and the kind of neighbors who mostly kept to themselves. I thought it was perfect for me, a small, affordable place where I could finally live alone and escape the chaos of my parents' house. Little did I know, the real horror was already living beneath me. I didn't notice anything unusual during the first week. My apartment was quiet, aside from the occasional thump from above or the faint hum of the building settling. But about 10 days after moving in, I started noticing noises coming from the apartment below mine. At first, it was subtle, footsteps, the sound of furniture being dragged, sometimes the faintest whisper of a voice. I tried to ignore it, thinking the building was just old and noisy. Then it got stranger. One night, I was sitting at my desk, typing on my laptop, when I heard a low, guttural hum coming from below. It wasn't music or singing, it was something off. My heart thumped, and I pressed my ear to the floor, straining to hear. The sound stopped immediately. I laughed nervously, telling myself I was being paranoid, but the seed of unease had been planted. The next day, I tried to learn more about my downstairs neighbor. I asked the building manager, a man named Mr. Harris, about the tenant. "Oh, that apartment," he said, raising his eyebrows. "Been empty for a while. Guy before you moved in was weird. Just paid his rent, kept to himself. Never caused problems. But yeah, he had some odd habits. Kept to himself mostly." I thanked him and left, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It started small at first, things like my shoes moved slightly from where I left them, my trash cans turned upside down, the faintest smell of damp wood and something metallic lingering in the apartment. I chalked it up to coincidence, but then the noises got worse. Every night around 2 a.m., I would hear shuffling, the sound of someone pacing back and forth directly beneath my bedroom. Sometimes I would hear whispers, like someone was muttering a conversation to themselves in a low, urgent tone. I tried to record it, but every time I played back the audio, it was just static. One evening, I returned home from work to find a small note taped to my door. It was handwritten in neat block letters, "I see you. Always." My hands trembled as I held it. There was no signature, no explanation, just those 4 words. I felt a chill run down my spine. Who could have left this? Mr. Harris's explanation about the previous tenant kept looping in my mind. Was he still living there somehow? I decided to investigate. I went downstairs and knocked on the neighbor's door, calling out politely. No response. The door was slightly ajar. I hesitated but pushed it open, peering inside. The apartment looked abandoned, just like Mr. Harris said. Dust covered the furniture, the air smelled musty, and the blinds were closed tight. There were no signs of anyone living there, or so I thought. I stepped inside cautiously, and that's when I noticed the strange marks on the walls, scratches, deep gouges that seemed to form a pattern. I couldn't make sense of them. As I was examining the marks, I heard the faint sound of footsteps above me. My apartment. My heart raced as I bolted back upstairs. I locked the door and called Mr. Harris. The apartment's empty, he insisted, but I knew better. Something, or someone, was there. I couldn't explain it, but I could feel it watching me, listening. The real terror began a week later. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of breathing. At first, I thought it was me, but then I realized it was coming from below. I froze, clutching my blanket, listening. The breathing was slow, deliberate, and chillingly close. Then I heard it, a whisper, "You shouldn't be here." My blood ran cold. I got out of bed and rushed to the floor, pressing my ear against it. The sound stopped immediately. I decided to set up cameras throughout my apartment, hoping to catch something. What I recorded over the next few nights made me question everything. There were fleeting shadows that didn't belong, objects moving slightly when I wasn't looking, and the most disturbing footage, a figure crouched in the corner of my bedroom, completely still, just staring at the camera. I showed the footage to a friend, who laughed nervously, saying it looked like a trick of the light. But I knew better. Things escalated quickly. One night, I woke to find my bedroom door wide open. I hadn't touched it, and the lock was still intact. On the floor, directly in front of my bed, was a single, small notebook. I picked it up with shaking hands. Inside were pages filled with detailed observations about me, my daily routines, my habits, even private thoughts I hadn't shared with anyone. And on the last page, in bold letters, "You're mine. Always." I moved out the next day. I couldn't stay another night, couldn't ignore the feeling of being constantly watched. But even after leaving, the memory of that apartment haunted me. Months later, I received an anonymous email with an attachment. It was a video file. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. The video showed my old apartment. And in the corner, crouched silently, was the man from below. Only now, he was staring directly at the camera. And then, slowly, he looked up, and I realized with a sickening chill that he was staring straight at me, filmed through a camera that had been pointed at my new apartment. I don't know who he is, or how he moved from apartment to apartment without anyone noticing. But I do know this: some neighbors aren't just next door. Some live beneath you, beside you, or across the hall, and some of them don't just watch. They follow. They study. And they wait for the perfect moment. Even now, years later, I can't sleep without checking my doors, checking my windows, checking for shadows that shouldn't exist. I can't shake the feeling that he's out there, always watching, always waiting. And the thought that terrifies me the most? He could be your neighbor too. And you wouldn't even know it until it's too late. I've never been the type to believe in creepy neighbor stories. You know the ones, people who claim their next-door neighbor is a stalker or some kind of monster. I thought those were just urban legends until it happened to me. I moved into a small, cozy house in a quiet suburb of Denver, excited to start fresh. My previous apartment had been cramped and noisy, so finally having my own space felt like freedom. The house was perfect, 2 stories, a small backyard, and neighbors who seemed polite but kept to themselves. Or so I thought. It started when a new neighbor moved in next door. He was a man in his early 40s, tall, with a serious face and quiet demeanor. I never saw him much during the day, which I thought was normal, people have jobs, right? But at night, things got strange. The first night he moved in, I was sitting on my porch enjoying the cool evening air when I noticed a shadow moving inside his house. At first, I assumed it was just him unpacking, but then I realized the lights were off in most of the rooms. The movement didn't make sense, it was slow, deliberate, almost unnatural. I shook it off, telling myself I was imagining things. The first unsettling incident happened a week later. I came home from work and found a small envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a handwritten note, "Welcome to the neighborhood. I've been waiting for you." My stomach dropped. I didn't know what to do. I didn't even know him yet, and here he was, leaving me a note like this. I kept it to myself, not wanting to alarm anyone. But deep down, a knot of fear had formed in my chest. Over the next few days, I noticed things that didn't add up. I would hear faint footsteps outside my window at night, soft shuffling as if someone was pacing back and forth. Sometimes, I'd see his car parked across the street, even though I knew he wasn't home. The feeling of being watched became constant. I started double-checking my locks, keeping my blinds closed, and sleeping with the lights on. But no matter what I did, the unease lingered. One night, around midnight, I woke up to the sound of a knock at my door. My heart raced. Who could it be at this hour? I peeked through the peephole and saw him, standing there with that same serious expression, holding a small package. I didn't answer. He knocked again, softly this time, and then left. Trembling, I opened the package. Inside was a small notebook, filled with entries that described me, my routines, my habits, even things I had never told anyone. The final entry chilled me to the bone. I know everything about you. And I'll always be here. I tried to confront him. One afternoon, I walked over to his house, heart pounding, ready to demand answers. But when I arrived, the house was empty. The garage was open, the door unlocked, but there was no sign of him. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. I asked a neighbor down the street about him, but no one seemed to know much, just that he had moved in recently and kept to himself. The nights became unbearable. I would wake to the sound of his footsteps in my yard, the faint creak of my porch swing moving, or the soft tap of a window being tapped from the outside. Sometimes, I would catch a glimpse of him through the blinds, standing perfectly still, staring at my house. My anxiety grew. I started installing cameras, hoping to capture evidence. But the footage only made things worse. There were times when the cameras picked up him inside my property, crouched in the shadows, disappearing the moment I checked. Then, one night, I experienced the unthinkable. I woke up to the sound of my front door opening. I froze, heart racing, clutching the baseball bat I kept nearby. The door creaked, and I could hear soft footsteps approaching my bedroom. I held my breath, waiting. And then, in the darkness, I saw him, standing at the foot of my bed, motionless, staring. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. He tilted his head slightly and whispered, "You can't hide from me. I'm always here." The next morning, I called the police. They searched my property thoroughly but found no signs of forced entry. No footprints, no fingerprints, nothing. It was as if he had never been there. I tried to explain, but without proof, they couldn't do anything. I felt trapped, paranoid, and constantly on edge. Days later, I found another package at my door. Inside was a series of photographs, my house, my yard, even pictures of me sleeping taken through my bedroom window. And in every photo, he was there. Always lurking in the shadows, always watching. I realized then that he hadn't just been observing me from outside, he had been inside my property without my knowledge, breaking into my house, and studying me like a predator stalking its prey. I decided I couldn't stay there any longer. I moved out immediately, leaving behind everything I couldn't carry. But even now, I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, watching, waiting for his next victim. I've changed my number, my address, even my routines, but the fear never leaves. Sometimes, when I'm in a new city or staying at a friend's house, I feel eyes on me in the darkness, and I can't shake the chilling thought, he might be closer than I think. The terrifying part is that he's not violent in a traditional sense, he doesn't attack. He watches. He studies. And he waits for the perfect moment. The notebook, the notes, the packages, they weren't threats. They were a reminder that I was never alone, that my life had been an open book to him from the moment I arrived. And the scariest realization? There's no telling how long he's been doing this. Some neighbors come and go without notice, but some, like him, never truly leave. I still think about that house, that quiet suburb, and the neighbor who never left. Every time I move, I make sure to research the area, check for unusual activity, and never ignore the small signs. But the truth is, I can't outrun him. He's out there, somewhere, always watching, waiting. And I know, deep down, that if he wanted, he could find me again. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone and the lights are dim, I hear the soft creak of floorboards, not in my apartment, but in my mind. And I remember the words he whispered that night, "You can't hide from me. I'm always here." And I know, with a bone-deep certainty, that he was right. I used to think that living in a quiet, suburban neighborhood meant safety. I was wrong. I moved into a small, two-story house in a sleepy town in Michigan. The street was lined with similar homes, and everything seemed peaceful. My neighbors were polite but distant, except for the house at the very end of the street. From the first day, there was something off about it. The windows were always dark, the lawn overgrown, and I never saw anyone come or go. Most people in the neighborhood whispered about the house, saying it had been empty for years. But sometimes, I would see a shadow moving behind the curtains, a faint silhouette that vanished whenever I looked closer. At first, I ignored it. Maybe it was my imagination, fueled by old horror movies and the isolation of living on a quiet street. But then strange things started happening. I would hear faint noises in the middle of the night, footsteps crunching on gravel outside my window, the creak of a gate swinging open, or the soft whisper of a voice calling my name. Each time, when I checked, there was nothing. The street was empty. The house at the end remained dark and silent. The first direct encounter happened about 2 weeks after I moved in. I was walking my dog in the evening when I noticed a man standing in the driveway of the abandoned house. He was tall, with a hood over his head, and he didn't move. Just stood there, staring in my direction. My dog growled, pulling me back. The man didn't react. I felt a chill run down my spine as I quickly walked home. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about his eyes, or rather, the absence of them. Something about him felt unnatural. Over the next few days, I noticed subtle signs that someone, or something, was watching me. My mail would be slightly moved from where I left it. My trash bins were overturned, even though I had securely closed them. Sometimes, I would come home to find the front door slightly ajar, though I was certain I had locked it. I told myself it was probably vandals or kids from the neighborhood playing pranks, but a deep sense of dread began to settle in my chest. Then came the notes. Small pieces of paper left on my doorstep, sometimes tucked under my doormat. They were handwritten in a messy, almost childlike scrawl. "I see you, don't walk alone, why do you look at me?" At first, I thought it was a sick prank, but the frequency and consistency were unnerving. The handwriting never changed, and the notes always appeared when I wasn't home or late at night. I started sleeping with my doors locked, checking my windows, and leaving lights on. But no matter what precautions I took, I could feel the presence lingering. One night, I woke up to the sound of scratching at my window. I froze, heart pounding. The street light outside barely illuminated the figure crouched just beyond the glass, a man, staring directly at me. His face was obscured by shadows, but the intensity of his gaze was unmistakable. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, but before I could speak, he vanished. I ran outside to search the street, but it was empty. No footprints, no signs of entry, nothing. The house at the end remained dark, silent, as if nothing had happened. I reported the incidents to the local police, but they found no evidence of forced entry or trespassing. Probably a prankster, they suggested. But I knew better. The feeling of being watched didn't come from imagination. It was real. And it was getting worse. Over the next month, the encounters escalated. I would see him standing at the end of the street during the day, perfectly still, watching my house. At night, I could hear whispers through the walls, low and deliberate, but when I tried to locate the source, there was nothing. My neighbors avoided the topic, giving me uneasy glances and vague warnings. One elderly woman finally told me, that house, the people who lived there weren't right. They never left. Some say they linger. I didn't understand what she meant at the time, but I would soon find out. The real terror began on a stormy night. I was alone, curled up on the couch with a blanket, trying to drown out the howling wind. The lights flickered, and then the power went out. I heard the familiar scratching at my window, followed by a soft thud at the door. My heart raced as I grabbed a flashlight and slowly approached. The door was ajar, and there, lying on my doorstep, was a small box. Inside were photographs, my house, my yard, and me, taken from angles only possible if someone had been inside the property. I felt my stomach drop. Someone had been watching me for weeks, maybe months. And judging by the photographs, they had been inside my house. I tried to leave town the next morning, but my car wouldn't start. I checked everything, battery, ignition, wires, but it was fine. The only thing that felt off was the feeling of eyes on me, watching from every shadow. I called a tow service, and while waiting, I glanced up the street. There he was, standing at the end, perfectly still, hood over his head, watching. My blood ran cold. I finally left with the tow truck, but even as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. The presence lingered in my mind, in the shadows, in every passing house. And the final realization hit me when I returned to collect my things a week later. The house at the end? It was occupied again. The same dark windows, the same overgrown lawn, and when I looked closely, I saw him in the driveway, standing perfectly still, as if he had never left. Years later, I still get chills thinking about that house and the neighbor who never truly left. I've moved multiple times since then, but the paranoia never fades. Some nights, when the wind howls and shadows dance, I swear I can see him in the corner of my vision, standing at the end of the street, watching, waiting, and reminding me that some neighbors never really leave. And the thought that terrifies me the most? He could be watching you right now, smiling behind darkened windows, waiting for the perfect moment to make his presence known. I never thought a move to a new city could turn into a nightmare. I had just graduated college and accepted a job in Seattle. Renting an apartment in a mid-rise building downtown seemed perfect, central location, reasonable rent, and the chance to finally live alone. The building was older, with creaky floors and long hallways, but I liked it. It had character, and I felt safe, until apartment 3B became a part of my life. At first, apartment 3B was just a number on a door. I didn't even know who lived there until I saw him for the first time, a man in his late 40s, always in a black hoodie, standing in the hallway as if he belonged there. He never introduced himself, never smiled. He just watched. At first, I thought it was awkward neighbor behavior, maybe someone new like me trying to size me up. But there was something about him that felt wrong, something that made my skin crawl. The first incident occurred 2 weeks after I moved in. I was returning home from work when I saw him standing near my door. I waved politely, but he didn't acknowledge me. Instead, he just stared, silently, for what felt like an eternity. I brushed it off, telling myself I was overreacting. But that night, as I lay in bed, I kept hearing faint noises outside my apartment, scratches, shuffling, soft whispers. I assumed it was just the building settling or the wind, but the sense of being watched persisted. Over the next few days, things escalated. I started noticing small, strange occurrences, my mail scattered across the floor, a single shoe left in the hallway, objects slightly moved in my apartment. I chalked it up to absent-mindedness or a prank, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. Apartment 3B was the only door that could lead to my hallway when I wasn't around, and every time I glanced at it, I felt that same cold, unblinking stare. One evening, I returned home to find my door slightly ajar. My heart pounded as I stepped inside. Nothing seemed disturbed, everything was in place, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there. I checked my security cameras, installed near the entrance, but the footage was corrupted. Static filled the screens for the entire evening. It was as if someone had known how to disable them, or worse, as if the presence itself could manipulate electronics. A week later, I received my first note. It was tucked under my door, handwritten in precise, almost clinical letters. "You are predictable. I know your schedule." My stomach turned. I didn't recognize the handwriting, but I knew it was him. That night, I barely slept, checking and rechecking every lock, listening for the faintest sound. I started leaving lights on constantly, avoiding the hallway unless necessary, and keeping my phone close. Then came the phone calls. They were silent at first, just long, drawn-out rings. When I finally answered, there was nothing but breathing. Slow, deliberate, and unnervingly close. Sometimes, I would swear I heard a whisper, "You can't hide." The police were called repeatedly, but there was never any proof. No fingerprints, no forced entry, nothing. Apartment 3B remained occupied, and he remained a shadow in the building, a presence that nobody acknowledged, but I knew was there. The most terrifying incident happened one night when I returned home later than usual. I noticed the lights in apartment 3B were off, and the hallway was empty. I was halfway up the stairs when I felt it, eyes on me. I froze. The temperature dropped suddenly, and my breath came out in puffs of visible vapor, though it was mid-June. I turned toward the door of 3B, and the man was standing there. No movement, just staring, his eyes black and unreadable. I wanted to run, but my legs refused to move. I watched him slowly lift a hand and press it against the doorframe, as if marking the territory between him and me. Then he disappeared. After that night, I decided I had to leave. I couldn't live there anymore, constantly watched, constantly threatened. I packed my belongings in secret, careful not to alert him, and left in the dead of night. But even as I drove away, I felt the weight of his stare, heavy and unrelenting. The final blow came a week later when I received a package at my new address, no return label, just my name written in the same precise handwriting. Inside was a small notebook. The notebook contained detailed observations of me, my routines, what I ate, who I talked to, even the times I showered. Every single page had notes, sketches, and comments about my apartment, my behavior, and my vulnerabilities. And on the last page, written in bold letters, was a single sentence, "You can leave, but I will always find you." I realized then that he wasn't just a neighbor, he was a predator who had been watching me for weeks, studying me, learning everything about my life. I don't know how long he had been doing it, or how many others he had observed before me. The thought that someone could invade your life so thoroughly, without leaving any trace, made my blood run cold. Years later, I still get chills whenever I think about apartment 3B. I've moved multiple times, changed numbers, changed routines, but the paranoia never fully leaves. Sometimes, in the dark, I think I can feel his eyes on me, following me, measuring me. And the most terrifying thought? He could be watching someone else right now, patiently observing, waiting for them to slip up, just as he did with me. I've told this story online, anonymously, hoping someone might understand or offer advice. But most people dismiss it, calling me paranoid or imagining things. Maybe I am. Maybe it's all in my head. But the evidence, the notebook, the notes, the broken camera footage, is real. And deep down, I know he's out there, lurking in the shadows, just like he did in apartment 3B. And if I learned one thing from that nightmare, it's this: some neighbors aren't just nearby, they're inside your life, waiting for the moment to make themselves known. I used to think my neighborhood was the safest place on earth. Small, tree-lined streets, white picket fences, families who waved when you walked by, it seemed perfect. I had just bought my first house in a quiet suburb of New Jersey, and I felt a sense of accomplishment and relief. But the peace didn't last. It all began with my next-door neighbor, Mr. Whitman. Mr. Whitman was an older man, maybe in his 60s, with a calm demeanor and a smile that always seemed just a little too polite. When I moved in, he came over to welcome me, offering a small tray of cookies and a handshake. He spoke softly, almost like he was reading from a script. At the time, I thought he was just a nice, quiet neighbor. I didn't know how wrong I was. The first sign that something was off came a few weeks later. I was sitting on my porch one evening, reading, when I noticed Mr. Whitman in his yard across the street, just standing and staring at my house. Not waving, not tending to his lawn, just watching. I felt uneasy but brushed it off. Perhaps he was thinking about something else or lost in thought. But the staring became a pattern. Day after day, week after week, he would be there, watching, silently. Then the small things started. Notes on my doorstep, always handwritten, always brief, don't forget to lock your doors. I saw you leave late tonight. Be careful what you say outside. At first, I thought it was some kind of neighborhood prank, maybe even a well-intentioned warning. But soon, I realized these notes contained details that only someone watching me constantly could know. I never spoke about my routines, my late nights, my private phone calls, but he did. He knew. One night, I woke up to a sound outside my bedroom window. I looked out and saw him, standing perfectly still, just beyond the porch light. His eyes seemed to pierce straight through the darkness. I felt my chest tighten, but when I blinked, he was gone. I checked the locks on all my doors and windows. Everything was secure. And yet, the feeling of being watched remained. Over the next few weeks, things escalated. I started noticing objects move from their usual spots, small scratches on my door frames, footprints on the porch despite the rain. Every time I stepped outside, I felt eyes on me. I tried to confront him, asking him politely if he had been leaving notes, but he would just smile, tilt his head slightly, and say, "I only want what's best for you." His calm, measured voice made me uneasy. There was something rehearsed about it, something that didn't quite feel human. The real terror began when I found a small camera hidden in my backyard planter. My heart pounded as I realized the extent of his surveillance. He had been watching my house, my comings and goings, my private life, for weeks, maybe months. I felt violated in a way I couldn't describe. Who knew what he had recorded? Who had he shown it to? The thought that my entire life had been an open book for him filled me with dread. I tried to leave, but selling a house in that area takes time. I started sleeping with my bedroom door locked, installing cameras inside, and triple-checking every window and door. But the feeling never left. I could sense him outside, always watching, always patient. Then, one evening, I received a note slipped under my door. This one was different. It had no words, just a photograph. A photograph of me, inside my living room, sitting on my couch, reading. Taken through my own window. My stomach dropped. He had been inside my property. He had seen me in my home, my sanctuary. I called the police, but without proof of forced entry, there was nothing they could do. I was trapped. Every sound outside, every shadow, every late-night noise became a threat. I started avoiding my porch, stopped taking evening walks, and barely left the house. The stress began to take a toll, insomnia, paranoia, anxiety. I felt like a prisoner in my own home. Then came the ultimate revelation. One night, I returned home late from work and found my front door unlocked. I was certain I had locked it. Inside, the house seemed normal, but I felt a presence behind me. I turned slowly and saw him, Mr. Whitman, standing at the top of my stairs. His face was calm, serene, almost friendly, but his eyes were empty, black, and unrelenting. He spoke in that soft, rehearsed tone, "You can't hide from me. I know everything." I froze. He was inside my home, somehow bypassing all security measures, moving silently, observing me. It was impossible, yet undeniable. I wanted to scream, to run, to call for help, but my mind froze. I realized then that he had planned this for months, watching, studying, preparing. Every note, every photograph, every movement I thought was private had been catalogued by him. And the worst part? He wasn't done. I managed to escape that night, running into the street, breathing heavily, terrified. The neighbors were asleep, and the street was empty. I called the police again, but even then, Mr. Whitman was gone when they arrived. No sign of him, no fingerprints, nothing. It was as if he had melted into the night. I sold the house shortly after, moving far away, changing my phone number, my routines, my life. But the paranoia never left. Every time I see a quiet, friendly neighbor, I can't help but wonder, are they really watching? Are they keeping tabs on me, just waiting for the perfect moment? The final, chilling part? Months later, I received a postcard in the mail, no return address, just my name in familiar handwriting. On the front was a photograph, my new home, my new street, and, in the corner, a shadowy figure standing silently. Mr. Whitman had found me again. Now, years later, I can't shake the thought that some neighbors know too much. They see you, study you, wait. And sometimes, no matter how far you run, they will always find you. I had always loved living alone. After years of sharing cramped apartments with roommates, I finally found a small 2-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood in Portland. It was peaceful, the kind of place where you could hear the birds in the morning and feel safe walking home at night. Or at least, that's what I thought. My neighbor across the hall, Mr. Lawson, seemed harmless enough at first. He was quiet, kept to himself, and occasionally nodded when we passed each other in the hallway. But over time, I realized that quiet can sometimes hide something far more sinister than noise ever could. It started with small things I almost ignored. I would return home from work and notice the door to his apartment slightly ajar. At first, I thought maybe he had forgotten to lock it, but then I would hear faint noises inside, whispers, or the soft creak of footsteps pacing. One evening, I saw his silhouette move past the hallway light as I returned with groceries, even though I knew I had passed him earlier that day. I told myself I was imagining things, that perhaps my mind was playing tricks after long hours at work. Then came the knocks. At first, they were soft, barely audible. Just a tap-tap on my door in the middle of the night. I would look through the peephole, but no one was there. I would tell myself it was the wind or maybe the building settling, yet the feeling of being watched began to gnaw at me. Nights became harder, sleep was fleeting, and every creak of the floorboards made my heart race. One night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of a loud knock, different from before, urgent, deliberate. I froze, my body paralyzed with fear. Slowly, I approached the door, clutching my baseball bat. I peeked through the peephole and saw him, Mr. Lawson, standing perfectly still, staring. His face was unreadable, calm, yet his presence was suffocating. I didn't answer. I waited, but the knock continued, rhythmic, deliberate. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. When I checked outside, the hallway was empty. Things escalated over the next few weeks. I would find small notes slipped under my door, "I know you're awake, don't ignore me, I see everything." Sometimes, the notes were accompanied by small objects, a paperclip bent into a strange shape, a tiny stone, or a piece of string tied in a knot. It was like he was sending messages, reminders that he was always watching, always present. The thought of someone lurking just across the hall, observing my every move, filled me with dread. One evening, I decided to confront him. I knocked on his door, trying to sound calm. No answer. I tried again, louder this time. Still nothing. I peered through the small gap of his slightly cracked door and saw nothing but darkness. The apartment looked empty, barren even, yet the feeling of being watched was undeniable. I went back to my apartment, but the tension remained, heavy and suffocating. Then the phone calls started. At first, silent, just long rings with nothing on the other end. But eventually, I began hearing whispers, soft, deliberate, urgent. Sometimes it was my name, other times fragments of sentences, "I know where you are, don't hide." I tried to trace the calls, but they always seemed to vanish before the operator could locate them. I began keeping a journal, documenting everything, hoping to make sense of what was happening, but the fear was consuming me. One night, I woke to a sound that made my blood run cold, a knock at my bedroom window. I froze, clutching the bat, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Outside, in the faint glow of the streetlight, I saw a shadowy figure standing, motionless, silent. My heart pounded as I realized the figure was staring directly at me, unmoving, waiting. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't respond. And then, just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. I knew then that I couldn't ignore it anymore. I installed cameras, locks, even motion sensors, anything to feel some sense of control. Yet, no matter what measures I took, I could still feel him. Mr. Lawson had become more than a neighbor, he had become a phantom presence, threading his way through my life, unseen but ever present. The breaking point came one night when I returned from a late shift. I found my apartment door unlocked. Every lock, every bolt I had secured, had been bypassed. Inside, everything appeared normal at first glance, but my gut told me otherwise. The lights flickered, shadows danced along the walls, and then I saw it, through my security camera footage on my phone, a figure crouched in the corner of my living room, just watching, just waiting. I called the police immediately, but by the time they arrived, he was gone. No signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing. It was as if he had simply dissolved into the shadows. They tried to reassure me, but I knew better. He had been inside my home, observing me, waiting for the perfect moment. And I realized something terrifying: this wasn't random. This was deliberate, calculated. Months later, I moved out. I couldn't stay in that apartment another night. But even now, years later, I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, somewhere. I've changed addresses, changed numbers, yet every creak in the floor, every shadow in the corner of my eye, makes my skin crawl. And the most terrifying thought? He could be knocking on your door tonight, just across the hall, patiently waiting, silently observing, and you wouldn't even know until it's too late. I never thought I'd be the type of person to get scared by my own neighbor. I've always considered myself rational, someone who doesn't believe in ghost stories or creepiness hiding behind ordinary walls. But after what happened when I moved into my new apartment in suburban Chicago, I realized that sometimes the scariest things are very, very real, and they live right below you. It was a 2-story building with only 4 apartments. Mine was on the 2nd floor. I liked it immediately: spacious, airy, and relatively cheap for the area. The building manager was polite but distant, never giving me much information about the other tenants, which I thought was normal. I quickly moved in, excited to start my new life in a place where I could finally be alone. But the moment I unpacked my last box, I felt it, a strange heaviness in the air, as if the building itself was watching me. I dismissed it, of course, thinking I was being dramatic. The first sign of something off was the noise. It started as subtle thuds in the ceiling, my neighbor's apartment directly below me. I assumed it was someone moving furniture or heavy footsteps. But soon, it escalated. The sounds became irregular, deliberate, almost like someone pacing back and forth at odd hours. It wasn't the usual upstairs or downstairs noise, it was different. There was intent behind it, as if the person below was aware of me and wanted me to hear. I decided to introduce myself. I knocked on the door below mine and called out politely. No answer. I asked the building manager later about the tenant and received a vague answer: apartment B has been rented for a while. He keeps to himself mostly. Just pays the rent and keeps quiet. Nothing unusual. I tried to believe it, but I couldn't shake the unease. Something about that apartment felt wrong. Weeks passed, and the disturbances grew. Objects in my apartment would move slightly. My keys were misplaced, my shoes left in different spots, and sometimes I could swear I saw a shadow flicker across the hallway outside my apartment, even though it was empty. My sleep became restless, filled with nightmares of being trapped in my own home while someone watched me from below. Then the notes started. Small scraps of paper slipped under my door, each with cryptic messages: I see you, don't look down, you can't escape. The handwriting was messy, almost frantic, and every note made my stomach twist. I knew it was him, my neighbor from below. But why? What did he want? I couldn't answer these questions, and the fear began to consume me. One night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to a scratching sound coming from the ceiling directly above my bedroom. My heart pounded as I sat up in bed, listening. It wasn't random, it was rhythmic, deliberate, almost like someone was counting or marking time. I grabbed my phone and tried to record it, hoping to have proof, but when I played it back, there was only silence. The sound had vanished as mysteriously as it appeared, leaving me questioning my sanity. The breaking point came a few nights later. I was woken up by loud banging directly above my bedroom ceiling. It was furious, rapid, and violent. Someone was trying to get my attention, or perhaps trying to terrify me. Trembling, I called the building manager, who came over immediately. He checked the apartment below mine and found it empty. No one was living there. The lights were off, the doors locked, and there was no evidence that anyone had been inside. He shrugged, muttering something about old buildings settling, but I knew better. Determined to understand what was happening, I began documenting everything. Every sound, every movement, every note. I installed cameras throughout my apartment. What I recorded over the next few nights turned my rational mind upside down. Objects moved on their own. Shadows flickered in corners. And then there was the footage from my bedroom camera, a figure crouched just outside the door, watching silently, completely still. I couldn't identify it, it was always in darkness, but I knew who it was, my basement neighbor. I confronted the manager again, showing him the footage, demanding answers. He became uneasy, avoiding my gaze. "Maybe you should consider moving," he said quietly, almost like a warning. That night, I realized the truth. My neighbor wasn't human, or at least, he wasn't like anyone I'd ever known. He had been there, watching me, slipping in and out of the shadows, manipulating my environment, all without anyone else noticing. The final act of terror came unexpectedly. I returned home one evening to find my apartment door unlocked. I never leave it unlocked. Inside, the place looked normal at first glance, but a cold feeling settled in my chest. My camera phone buzzed, new footage had been uploaded. I opened it to find someone crouched in the corner of my bedroom, watching me sleep through the small crack in the blinds. But the impossible part? I had locked every door, every window. He had been inside my apartment. I packed immediately and left that night, moving far away from the building, the street, and the neighborhood. But even now, years later, I still feel the presence of that neighbor below me. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I swear I can hear the faintest scratching, the whisper of someone pacing beneath the floorboards, counting the seconds until they find me again. The terrifying truth I learned is that some neighbors aren't just next door or across the hall. Some live beneath you, unseen, silent, and patient. They study, wait, and when you least expect it, they make their presence known. And I know, deep down, that my basement neighbor could find me again, no matter where I go. Because some neighbors never truly leave. I had always dreamed of moving to a quiet suburban neighborhood. After years of living in the city, surrounded by traffic, noise, and the constant hum of people, I longed for peace. When I finally bought a small, two-story house in a sleepy Michigan town, it felt like a dream come true. Everything was perfect, or so I thought. My next-door neighbor, Mr. Greaves, was a man in his late 50s. Tall, thin, and always impeccably dressed, he rarely smiled and almost never spoke. At first, I thought he was just a private person, preferring solitude. Our first encounter was awkward but polite. He nodded as I waved, but that was it. There was something unnerving about him, a subtle stiffness in the way he moved, a sharpness in his gaze that made me uneasy. The first sign that something was off came about a month after I moved in. I noticed that whenever I walked outside, he would be watching from his porch, standing perfectly still, almost statue-like. Sometimes he would follow me with his eyes when I went into my backyard, but the moment I looked directly at him, he would vanish behind the curtains. It was subtle at first, but over time, the frequency increased. Then came the notes. Small pieces of paper left on my doorstep, messy, scrawled handwriting with cryptic messages. "I see you, don't wander at night, always careful." At first, I thought it was a prank by some local kids, but the handwriting was too deliberate, too precise. The messages contained details only someone watching me closely could know, times I left the house, what I wore, even what I had for dinner. I tried to confront Mr. Greaves politely, asking if he knew anything about the notes. He would just smile slightly, his face calm and unreadable, and say, "I only want what's best for you." I didn't know whether to be reassured or terrified, but deep down, I knew I wasn't safe. Over the next few weeks, the incidents escalated. I would hear footsteps outside my windows late at night, soft tapping at the doors, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. My mail was sometimes tampered with, small items in my yard would move slightly. It became clear that he wasn't just watching, he was actively interacting with my life, making his presence known in ways that sent chills down my spine. One night, I woke to the sound of the front door unlocking. I rushed to my bedroom window, my heart racing, but saw nothing. I grabbed my phone and called the police, but by the time they arrived, everything was normal. There were no signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing. But I knew. He had been inside. He had been inside my house while I slept, completely silent, completely unnoticed. I started installing cameras, motion sensors, and extra locks. I wanted proof, some way to finally confront him and feel safe again. But the cameras captured things I couldn't explain, shadows moving across my walls when no one was there, fleeting figures in the corners of the footage, and the most chilling sight, a man standing at the edge of my porch at night, just watching, completely still, his gaze fixed on my house. The final, terrifying incident happened one rainy evening. I had returned from work late, drenched and exhausted. As I approached my door, I noticed something odd, a faint light flickering through the curtains of Mr. Greaves's house. I had never seen him turn on any lights before. I paused, watching, and then I saw him. Standing in the doorway, staring directly at me. His eyes were dark, piercing, unreadable. I felt an icy wave of fear wash over me. I wanted to run, but my legs refused. I turned to look at my own house, and my heart stopped. The front door was slightly open. I hadn't touched it. Slowly, I walked up to it, and that's when I saw the notebook lying on the welcome mat. Inside were pages filled with detailed observations about me, my daily routines, my habits, even things I had never told anyone. And the final line, written in bold letters, chilled me to the core: I'm always here. Always watching. I didn't sleep that night. I barely slept for weeks. I moved as quickly as I could, leaving behind most of my belongings, changing my number, and trying to erase any trace of my previous life. But the feeling never left. Even now, years later, I can feel it, the knowledge that someone, somewhere, could be watching, studying, and waiting. The scariest part is that Mr. Greaves never seemed violent. He never threatened me directly, never raised a hand. But his presence was suffocating, invasive, and constant. I realized that some neighbors aren't just nearby, they exist in the margins of your life, silent but always present, shaping your world in ways you don't even notice. And the thought that terrifies me the most? If he could find me once, he could find me again. Because some neighbors never truly leave. When I moved into my apartment complex in a quiet town in Ohio, I thought I had finally found the perfect place. The building was small, only 3 floors, with friendly neighbors and a calm, suburban vibe. My unit was on the 2nd floor, and the one next to mine, apartment 2B, had a door that was always locked. I never saw anyone enter or leave, which didn't bother me at first. I assumed the tenant was just private, maybe even reclusive. But soon, I realized that some doors are locked for a reason, and some neighbors are better left unknown. The first strange sign came a few weeks after I moved in. I was returning from work late one night when I noticed a faint light flickering under the crack of 2B's door. At first, I thought it was a neighbor just coming home late, but the light pulsed strangely, like a heartbeat, and then it vanished. I told myself I was imagining things and went inside. But as days passed, I started noticing small oddities, the faint hum of a radio, whispers that seemed to come from behind the walls, and sometimes a shadowy figure briefly reflected in the hallway mirror. At first, I tried to ignore it. Everyone has quirks, right? But then came the notes. Slipped under my door, carefully folded, with messages like, "Don't ignore the door, I know when you're home, watch your windows." Each note felt personal, knowing, invasive. Whoever it was knew details of my routine, my comings and goings. The thought that someone could be observing me so closely was terrifying, and it didn't matter that I couldn't see them. The real escalation occurred one stormy night. I woke to the sound of knocking, not soft or timid, but urgent, insistent. My heart raced as I crept toward the door. Peeking through the peephole, I saw nothing. The hallway was empty, dimly lit by the emergency exit lights. The knocking continued, rhythmic and deliberate, until it abruptly stopped. My mind raced. Was it the wind? Or something else? I double-checked my locks, but the feeling of being watched never left. Over the next few weeks, I tried to be careful. I kept the blinds drawn, installed extra locks, and avoided the hallway when possible. Yet the presence persisted. Objects in my apartment began to shift. My keys moved from the counter to the coffee table, my shoes were slightly displaced, and sometimes I could swear I felt a cold breath near the door, even though no one was there. Each day felt heavier, each night more suffocating. Then came the breaking point. One evening, I returned from a late shift to find my apartment door slightly ajar. I never leave it unlocked. My stomach sank. Inside, the apartment looked untouched, but I felt a presence behind me. My phone buzzed, a message with no number. I opened it and found a single photograph, my living room, taken from the hallway outside, with the shadow of a figure visible near the door. My heart stopped. Someone had been inside my home. I called the police, who arrived quickly. They searched the building and checked the apartment next door, 2B. The place was empty. Windows locked, door locked, no signs of recent entry. But I knew what I had seen. I knew someone had been inside. And the thought that 2B could be empty and yet someone could move freely in my apartment was horrifying. The final terror came a few nights later. I had installed cameras in my hallway, pointing toward the door of 2B. I wanted evidence, anything to prove I wasn't imagining it. When I checked the footage, I saw something impossible. The door remained locked the entire time. Yet, just beyond it, a shadow moved, tall, thin, deliberate. It shifted, crouched, and paused as if studying me. And then it vanished. I knew then that whatever was behind that door didn't obey normal rules. It wasn't human, or at least, not entirely. I didn't stay long after that. I packed what I could and left in the middle of the night, moving to a different state, changing my number, my routines, and cutting any ties to that apartment. Yet the fear followed me. Even now, years later, when I think about the locked door next door, I feel the cold presence again. The feeling that eyes are watching, waiting, studying. The scariest realization? Some neighbors aren't just next door, they exist in the margins of your life, unseen, untouchable, and patient. And if they want, they can enter your world, no matter how secure you think you are. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear the faintest knock, echoing in the distance. And I know, deep down, that 2B is still out there, watching, waiting for the next tenant to arrive, and the next opportunity to remind them that some doors should never be opened. I always considered myself lucky to have moved into a quiet neighborhood in suburban Ohio. It was exactly what I wanted after years of noisy apartments in the city, tree-lined streets, low traffic, and neighbors who nodded politely but never bothered anyone. But I quickly learned that appearances can be deceiving. Some neighbors aren't just polite, they're watching. And some watch far more than you ever want them to. My next-door neighbor, Mr. Callahan, was a man in his 60s, tall and wiry, with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He had lived in the neighborhood for decades, and people often described him as friendly but private. I saw him occasionally tending his garden, waving politely as I left for work, or shuffling to his mailbox. Nothing seemed unusual until the day I found the first note. It was a small slip of paper tucked under my door. On it were words that sent a chill down my spine. "You were up late last night. I saw you." My stomach turned. How could he know? I hadn't spoken to anyone about staying up late, and I hadn't even told him I had moved in recently. I tried to brush it off as a coincidence, but the notes continued, becoming more frequent and more detailed. They described things only someone observing me constantly could know: when I left for work, what I ate for dinner, even conversations I had in my own home. At first, I thought it might be a prank, but the level of detail was too precise. I began keeping a journal, documenting every note, every incident, every sound outside my house. That's when I noticed it. Mr. Callahan was always around. I would catch glimpses of him in his yard, standing still for long periods, staring in my direction. Sometimes, I would see his shadow through the curtains across the street, watching. My gut told me this was no coincidence. He was obsessed, and he had been watching me since the day I moved in. Things escalated quickly. One evening, I returned from work to find my front door unlocked. I was certain I had locked it. Inside, nothing seemed out of place, yet the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. The next day, I found another note. I was in your house last night. You didn't even hear me. My heart pounded. Someone had been inside him, and I had no way to prove it. The police were sympathetic but powerless. Without physical evidence, it was just my word against his. I tried to confront him directly. One afternoon, I walked over to his house and knocked on the door. He answered, smiling faintly, as though nothing were wrong. I asked him about the notes, the observations, the fact that someone had been inside my home. He tilted his head, a calm, unreadable expression on his face, and said softly, I only want what's best for you. Don't be afraid. His words, meant to reassure, made me feel even more vulnerable. I left, shaking, and knew then that reasoning with him was impossible. The nightmare continued. Every day felt like a surveillance operation. I began changing my routines, avoiding being outside at predictable times, and double-checking every lock. Yet no matter what I did, I could sense him. Watching. Studying. Waiting. One night, I installed cameras around my property. Reviewing the footage the next morning made my blood run cold. There he was. Standing at the edge of my yard, perfectly still, hidden partially by shadows, observing me. And when I looked closer, I realized he had followed me home from work the previous evening, staying just out of view until I arrived. I couldn't take it anymore. I packed my essentials and left town, staying with a friend in another state. I hoped the distance would break his hold over me, but the terror wasn't limited by miles. A week later, a package arrived at my friend's house. Inside was a small notebook. Every page detailed my life, the streets I walked, the stores I visited, the friends I met. And on the last page, written in his precise handwriting, was a sentence that made my blood run cold: distance doesn't matter. I know where you are. I will always know. Years later, I have moved several times, changed numbers, and tried to erase every trace of my old life. Yet the feeling never leaves. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I see shadows in the corners of my vision, and my chest tightens with the memory of those cold, unblinking eyes. I know he could find me again, and the thought chills me to the core. What I learned from Mr. Callahan is simple: some neighbors don't just live next door. They exist in the margins of your life, observing, waiting, and planning. And some will never stop, no matter how far you run or how many precautions you take. The scariest part? I know he's out there somewhere, watching another new neighbor, following, studying, waiting for the perfect moment to make his presence known. And I realize now, some neighbors aren't just next door. They are closer than you think, closer than you can ever escape. When I moved into my first apartment in a quiet neighborhood in Minnesota, I thought I had finally found peace. The building was small, the neighbors seemed friendly, and everything appeared perfectly ordinary. But my next-door neighbor, a man named Gerald, quickly proved that ordinary can hide extraordinary darkness. At first, Gerald seemed harmless. He was in his late 40s, wore glasses, and always greeted me with a nod or a quiet hello in the hallway. I thought he was just shy. But soon, I noticed something strange. He laughed. Not casual or friendly laughter, but a low, almost guttural chuckle that seemed to come from nowhere. It would start late at night, echoing faintly through the walls, and stop suddenly, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. The first time it truly unsettled me was about a month after I moved in. I was sitting on my couch, reading, when I heard it, a low, menacing laugh, seemingly just beyond my bedroom wall. My heart raced. I knocked on the wall lightly, hoping to break the tension. Silence. Then, a whisper, barely audible, followed by another chuckle. I told myself it was nothing, maybe some old pipes or a neighbor with a strange sense of humor. But over the next few days, the laughter became more frequent, more targeted. It seemed to echo my every movement, reacting to me as if Gerald could sense my every thought. Soon, it wasn't just the laughter. I started finding small notes slipped under my door. Each one was short, cryptic, written in messy handwriting. I know what you did, you can't hide, I see everything. At first, I tried to laugh it off, convincing myself it was a prank. But then I realized these messages weren't random. They described moments of my day only I would know, what I had for breakfast, when I took a shower, even when I glanced out my window. Gerald wasn't just watching, he was studying me, meticulously documenting my life. The tension escalated to the point where I could no longer feel safe in my own apartment. I began installing locks, cameras, and alarms, yet the feeling of being observed never left. Sometimes, I would catch glimpses of him in the hallway, standing perfectly still, just outside my door. Sometimes, he would disappear when I blinked, leaving no trace that he had ever been there. It was as if he existed in the shadows, part human, part specter, and completely obsessed with me. One night, the fear reached its peak. I was awakened by my front door rattling, slow and deliberate. I grabbed my bat and crept toward the noise, my heart hammering in my chest. Peering through the peephole, I saw him, Gerald, standing perfectly still, staring directly at me. His glasses reflected the dim hallway light, and his lips were curled into a faint, knowing smile. The sound I had dreaded all month, the laugh, started again, soft at first, then rising into that chilling, guttural tone. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. The next morning, I discovered another note, taped to my door. Last night was fun. Let's play again soon. That was it. No explanation, no apology, just a chilling promise. I realized then that he wasn't just a strange neighbor, he was a predator, someone who derived pleasure from invading my life, terrorizing me silently while maintaining the facade of normalcy. Desperate, I contacted the building management. They assured me that Gerald had lived there for years and had no complaints filed against him. I even tried to involve the police, but with no concrete proof, no forced entry, no physical threats, no video showing him inside my apartment, they couldn't act. Gerald was untouchable, a perfect ghost in the system. The final incident occurred when I decided I couldn't live like this anymore. I began packing my belongings late one night, trying to leave without alerting him. As I moved boxes, the laughter returned, louder than ever, echoing through the walls and into my chest. I froze, clutching my keys, and felt a presence behind me. Slowly, I turned, and there he was, standing in the hallway outside my apartment, watching silently, his face unreadable but somehow triumphant. I left that night, abandoning the apartment and moving to another state. But even now, years later, I can't escape the memory of Gerald. The laughter haunts me, faint and distant, like a shadow lurking just outside my perception. I've learned to distrust quiet neighbors, to never ignore a feeling of being watched, and to understand that sometimes the ordinary is only a mask. The most terrifying thought? Gerald is still out there, in some other apartment, watching some other unsuspecting neighbor, waiting to play his sinister game again. And I know that if I ever return to that neighborhood, or if I'm careless, I could become his target once more. Some neighbors are not just nearby, they are inside your life, shaping it in ways you cannot see, and sometimes, they are far more dangerous than anyone realizes. I never thought a simple key could change my life, but after moving into a small townhouse in a quiet suburb of Pennsylvania, I learned just how wrong I was. The neighborhood seemed perfect, quiet streets, manicured lawns, and neighbors who waved politely but kept to themselves. My next-door neighbor, a man named Richard, was no exception. At first glance, he appeared completely ordinary, middle-aged, polite, quiet. But appearances can be deceiving. It all started the day I found a key slipped under my door. A plain brass key with no identifying marks, attached to a small note, "You might need this someday." My first thought was that it was a mistake, maybe Richard had dropped it. But when I returned it to him the next day, he only smiled and said, "Keep it. You never know." His calm tone and unreadable expression sent a chill down my spine, but I tried to brush it off. Over the following weeks, strange things began to happen. I would hear soft noises outside my apartment at night, footsteps, rustling leaves, sometimes a faint whisper. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just the neighborhood settling or maybe a stray animal. But then I started noticing objects in my apartment slightly out of place. My keys would be on the counter instead of the hook, my shoes slightly shifted, and sometimes, my front door was unlocked, though I had locked it myself. One evening, I returned home to find the key I had been given lying on my coffee table. I hadn't touched it. Attached was a note, "You're being watched. Use the key wisely." My heart raced. I tried to confront Richard again, but he acted as if nothing had happened, smiling faintly and saying, "I only want to help you." His calm demeanor made me uneasy, as though he was enjoying my fear. I started to investigate, trying to figure out what the key was for. I tested every lock in my apartment, doors, windows, even the storage closet, but nothing fit. I asked Richard directly, but he only chuckled softly, a low, almost menacing sound. It was the first time I felt real fear. He knew something I didn't, and he was enjoying the tension he had created. Then, one night, I woke to a faint scratching sound coming from my front door. Heart pounding, I grabbed the key and cautiously approached the lock. To my horror, it fit perfectly. My hands trembled as I turned it. The door creaked open, and I found myself staring into a dark hallway that I had never seen before. It wasn't part of my townhouse, it led somewhere else entirely, a narrow, dimly lit corridor that seemed to stretch on forever. The corridor was silent except for the faint echo of my footsteps. I felt drawn forward, compelled by a force I couldn't explain. The air grew colder as I moved deeper, the shadows lengthening and twisting in ways that didn't make sense. I passed doors on either side, each one slightly ajar, revealing glimpses of rooms that seemed to exist outside of reality. In one, I saw a figure hunched over, watching me silently. In another, I glimpsed a wall covered in photographs, pictures of me, taken from angles I hadn't noticed. At times I hadn't realized I was being observed. I turned to leave, but the key slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. When I bent down to pick it up, the corridor had changed. The doors I had passed were gone, replaced by walls that seemed to close in on me. Panic surged as I realized I was trapped. And then, I heard it, the soft, deliberate footsteps of someone moving behind me. Slowly, I turned, and there he was, Richard, smiling faintly, holding a key identical to the one I had found. "I warned you," he said calmly, his voice echoing in the corridor. "Some doors should never be opened." I ran, blindly, trying every door, every passage, but the hallway twisted endlessly, a maze that shifted whenever I turned my head. The air grew colder, the shadows darker, until I finally collapsed in exhaustion. Richard stood over me, silent, patient, watching. Then he knelt down and placed the key in my hand. "This is your choice," he whispered. "Use it wisely, or it will use you." I don't remember how I made it back to my apartment. The corridor, the hallway, Richard, everything vanished as if it had never existed. But the key remained. I locked it away in a drawer, but I know it's only a matter of time before its pull returns. And I can't help but wonder what waits behind the doors it opens, and whether Richard is still watching, smiling, patient, waiting for me to make the wrong choice. Even now, years later, the key sits in my drawer, a silent reminder that some neighbors are far more dangerous than they seem. They observe, they manipulate, and sometimes, they hold the keys to places you were never meant to enter. And I've learned the hard way, curiosity may not just kill the cat, it can trap the neighbor too. I had always considered myself cautious, the kind of person who double-checked locks and avoided unnecessary risks. That caution was about to be tested in ways I could never have imagined when I moved into my first house in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Wisconsin. The streets were lined with maple trees, lawns perfectly manicured, and neighbors who seemed friendly enough. But my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Donnelly, gave me a strange feeling from the start, one I didn't fully understand until it was almost too late. At first, she seemed harmless. In her 70s, small and frail, she greeted me with a warm smile whenever I passed her yard. She offered me cookies on the first day, chatted politely about the weather, and seemed genuinely kind. But soon, I began to notice unusual behavior. She appeared outside at odd hours, sometimes late at night, sometimes early in the morning, standing perfectly still, watching my house. Her eyes would follow me across the yard, and when I waved, she wouldn't respond. Instead, she would vanish quietly into her house, leaving only the echo of her presence. The first truly unsettling incident occurred one evening when I was home alone. I had just finished dinner and was watching TV when I heard the faint sound of someone walking along the side of my house. At first, I assumed it was a stray animal, but then I noticed the shadow outside my window. There she was, Mrs. Donnelly, standing perfectly still in the dim light, staring directly at me. My heart raced as I ducked behind the couch, unsure whether to call the police or just stay frozen. Moments later, she disappeared, silently retreating into her house. Over the next few weeks, the disturbances escalated. I began noticing small signs that someone had been in my yard, footprints in the dew-covered grass, leaves scattered near my back door, and occasionally, small objects moved from their original spots. I started installing cameras around my property, hoping to catch whoever, or whatever, was responsible. The footage shocked me. Every night, Mrs. Donnelly would appear, creeping along the edge of my property, sometimes stopping to peer into windows, other times leaving objects, a stone, a flower, a note, on my porch. The notes were brief but disturbing. I watch because I care, don't ignore me, you are never alone. At first, I tried to believe she meant well, that perhaps she was lonely or worried about me. But the way she observed, the way she lingered, it felt invasive, threatening. The sense of being watched began to consume me, making even the simplest tasks terrifying. I stopped sitting on the porch, avoided the yard, and even hesitated to look out the windows at night. One night, the terror reached a peak. I woke around 2 a.m. to the sound of a soft tapping on my bedroom window. My heart pounded as I looked outside. She was there, standing perfectly still, her face calm but her eyes dark and unblinking. I grabbed my phone to call the police, but when I looked again, she was gone. Just like that, vanished without a trace. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door. It read, "You can run, but I will find you." My stomach churned. I knew then that she had been inside my yard, perhaps even my house, while I slept. The thought of someone moving silently through my property, knowing my routines, watching my every move, terrified me in a way I had never experienced. I confronted her the following day, but she acted as if nothing had happened. She smiled gently, her hands clasped in front of her, and said, "I only want what's best for you. You must understand, I care." Her calm demeanor was terrifying. I realized that reasoning with her was impossible. She had spent weeks, maybe months, meticulously observing me, studying my habits, and establishing control. Determined to regain a sense of safety, I moved my bedroom to the back of the house, installed extra locks, and even placed motion sensors around the property. Yet the feeling of being watched persisted. I could hear footsteps in the yard at night, the soft rustle of leaves, and sometimes, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. My sleep was fragmented, my nerves raw. The final incident occurred one stormy night. I had returned late from work, soaked and exhausted, and was preparing for bed when I noticed a faint glow from the living room window. My heart raced as I saw her silhouette, Mrs. Donnelly, standing at the edge of my porch, completely still, observing me. I froze, unable to move, until the lights inside the house flickered and went out. When they returned, she was gone. But the front door was slightly ajar. I had locked it. I packed immediately and left the house, staying with a friend in another city. Even now, years later, I can't escape the feeling of her presence. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear soft footsteps and tapping at my window, a gentle but deliberate reminder that she is still out there, watching, patient, and waiting. The most terrifying realization is that Mrs. Donnelly never needed to be violent to control me. Her presence, her observation, and her calculated patience were enough. I learned that some neighbors aren't just living nearby, they exist in the margins of your life, silently shaping it, waiting for the perfect moment to remind you that you are never truly alone. And I know, deep down, that if I ever return to that neighborhood, she will be there, watching, smiling, and reminding me that the nightly visitor never truly leaves. When I moved into my new apartment in a quiet suburb of Virginia, I thought I had finally escaped the chaos of city life. The neighborhood was peaceful, filled with manicured lawns, kids playing in the streets, and neighbors who smiled politely but didn't pry. My apartment was on the second floor, offering a perfect view of the street below, and a sense of safety that I would soon realize was an illusion. My next-door neighbor, Mr. Hastings, seemed harmless enough. In his late 50s, quiet, and rarely seen outside, he kept to himself. We exchanged polite greetings occasionally, and that was the extent of our interactions. At first, I was relieved. A quiet neighbor meant privacy, right? But I soon discovered that quiet doesn't always mean harmless. It started subtly. One night, I noticed that the window in my bedroom, the one that faced his apartment, was slightly ajar, even though I was certain I had locked it. I dismissed it as a mistake on my part and locked it again. But over the next few nights, it happened repeatedly. Each time, the window seemed to have been tampered with, as if someone had deliberately checked to see whether it was secure. Then came the noises. Soft scratching sounds at odd hours, whispers that seemed to come from outside the window, and occasionally, faint footsteps pacing just beyond my balcony. At first, I tried to rationalize it, maybe the wind, maybe a branch tapping the glass. But the sounds grew more deliberate, more calculated, as if someone was intentionally trying to make me aware of their presence. One night, around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of my bedroom window rattling. My heart pounded as I slowly approached, clutching a baseball bat. Peering through the blinds, I saw him, Mr. Hastings, standing perfectly still on the balcony, staring directly at my window. His face was calm, expression unreadable, yet there was something deeply unsettling in his gaze. I froze, unsure whether to call the police or simply retreat. Moments later, he vanished as silently as he had appeared. After that incident, I began finding small notes slipped under my door, each written in the same precise handwriting: "You sleep too soundly, I watch while you dream, don't ignore me." The messages were brief, cryptic, and chillingly personal. They referenced things only someone observing me closely could know: when I went to bed, when I woke up, even details about my daily routine. The sense of being watched became unbearable. Determined to regain control, I installed security cameras focused on my balcony and window. What I recorded terrified me. Every night, just as I was about to fall asleep, a shadowy figure would appear, lingering silently outside the window. Sometimes he would tap lightly on the glass, other times, he would crouch, observing. And when I checked the footage during the day, there was never any evidence of how he got there. It was as if he existed only at night, in the shadows, just beyond my reach. The situation escalated to a breaking point one evening. I returned home late from work to find my front door unlocked. I never left it unlocked. Inside, nothing seemed disturbed, but the feeling of being observed was overwhelming. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number: "You cannot hide from me." Panic surged through me. I realized then that Mr. Hastings had not only been watching me, but had also found ways to invade my personal space without leaving any trace. I tried confronting him, but as always, he remained calm and unreadable. "I only want to make sure you are safe," he said, his voice eerily soothing. But the kindness in his tone did nothing to ease my fear. I knew that his intentions were anything but benign. The window, the notes, the surveillance, it was all part of a calculated effort to control and terrify me, without ever directly harming me. The final incident occurred one stormy night. I was lying in bed, exhausted, when I heard the faint sound of the window sliding open. My heart raced as I reached for my phone to call the police. By the time I glanced toward the window, the figure was there, Mr. Hastings, crouched on the balcony, staring at me with those unblinking eyes. I froze, unable to move. Then, as the wind howled outside, he disappeared once again, leaving only the faint echo of his presence. I moved immediately the next day, leaving behind most of my belongings. Even now, years later, I cannot shake the feeling of being watched. Sometimes, when I am alone in a new place, I swear I hear faint scratching on a window, or catch a glimpse of a shadow lurking just beyond the glass. I know, deep down, that some neighbors are not just next door, they are in the margins of your life, silent, patient, and always watching. The most terrifying part? I know he is still out there, somewhere, observing another unsuspecting neighbor, testing windows, leaving notes, and reminding them that privacy is an illusion. And I realize now that no matter where I go, the fear of the locked window, and what it concealed, will never truly leave me. I moved into my apartment in a small town in Michigan because it was cheap and close to work. The building was old, creaky, and a little run down, but I didn't care. I just wanted a place of my own. It had one neighbor on each side, and everyone kept to themselves. Or so I thought. At first, everything seemed normal. My neighbor to the left, Mr. Larkin, was quiet and polite. I would sometimes see him on his way out to the mailbox or carrying groceries, nodding politely but never lingering for conversation. I thought it was nice, having a neighbor who respected boundaries. But that sense of peace didn't last long. It started with small noises, scratching sounds, faint thumps in the walls, and occasional low creaks late at night. I told myself it was just the old building settling. But then the noises became more specific, more deliberate. It sounded like footsteps pacing in rhythm, stopping, starting, and sometimes scratching at the wall next to my bed. I began lying awake at night, heart racing, waiting for the next sound. The first note appeared under my door about a week later. It was handwritten, with jagged, uneven letters. "You hear me, don't you?" My stomach twisted. I hadn't told anyone about the noises. How could someone know that I heard them? Panic set in, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a prank? But something about the handwriting, the tone, it didn't feel like a joke. Over the next few nights, the incidents escalated. I would wake to find objects moved from where I had left them, books on the floor, shoes pushed aside, even my bed slightly shifted. And always, the noises came first. Scratches in the wall, rhythmic tapping, sometimes soft, deliberate whispers. I began installing cameras, motion sensors, anything that might give me proof of what was happening. The footage revealed nothing at first. Nothing entered my apartment, nothing moved on its own. But I could see shadows flitting across the corners, vague and indistinct, never fully captured by the camera. One night, I noticed something horrifying, faint imprints on the plaster of the wall next to my bed, almost like someone had pressed their fingers into it. I realized with mounting dread that my neighbor wasn't just nearby, he was inside my walls. I confronted Mr. Larkin directly. I knocked on his door, my hands shaking, and asked if he had been entering my apartment or doing something to the walls. He smiled faintly, a cold, calm expression that made my skin crawl. "Why would I do that?" he said. "I just like to make sure you're comfortable." There was no denial, no admission, just an eerie calm that left me feeling more terrified than ever. I began sleeping with lights on, doors locked, windows sealed, yet the scratching continued. I could feel it at night, right through the wall, sometimes right next to my bed. And the whispers became clearer, though still indistinct, words I couldn't quite make out, but tones filled with intent, with patience, with a cruel curiosity. The breaking point came one night when I woke to see a shadow moving along the wall above my bed. I sat up, frozen in terror, and the scratches grew louder, more frenzied. I grabbed a hammer and started banging on the wall, demanding whoever was inside to stop. The noises paused, almost like the person was listening, waiting. And then a whisper, soft but clear, "You can't leave." "Not yet." I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next day, I called a contractor to inspect the walls. When he opened the panels, what I found chilled me to the bone. There were small, hollowed-out sections in the walls, perfectly sized for someone to squeeze inside. Fingerprints pressed into the plaster confirmed my worst fears. Someone had been living inside my walls, watching me, listening to me, controlling my life without ever showing themselves. I moved immediately. I couldn't stay another night. I packed what I could and left the apartment, leaving behind most of my belongings. Even now, years later, I can't forget the feeling of those hidden eyes, the knowledge that someone had been inside my home without my consent, waiting, observing. The most terrifying part is knowing that my neighbor could have been there for months, maybe even years, studying me, learning my habits, predicting my every move. Some neighbors aren't just next door, they are inside your life, silent, patient, and utterly terrifying. And I know, deep down, that he is still out there, in another building, in another wall, watching the next unsuspecting tenant, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal himself. When I moved into my first house in a quiet neighborhood in Oregon, I thought I had found the perfect place to start fresh. The streets were tree-lined, neighbors waved politely, and everything seemed calm and orderly. My next-door neighbor, a man named Mr. Whitaker, appeared normal at first, tall, middle-aged, quiet, and always impeccably dressed. But normal can be deceiving, and I would soon learn that some neighbors hide the darkest secrets behind the friendliest smiles. At first, everything seemed fine. Mr. Whitaker would occasionally wave as I walked my dog or nod politely while mowing his lawn. Our interactions were minimal but courteous. However, I began noticing odd patterns. He was always outside at strange hours, sometimes early in the morning when the streets were empty, sometimes late at night, standing perfectly still in his driveway, staring at my house. When I waved, he would smile faintly but say nothing, giving me a feeling that something about him was off. The first truly unsettling moment came a week after I moved in. I had returned home late from work to find his front door wide open. The house appeared empty, but a faint light flickered in one of the upstairs windows. My heart raced as I approached cautiously. When I knocked on the door, there was no response. I backed away, shaken, and when I looked again, the door was closed, lights off, and no sign that anyone had been there. I tried to rationalize it as forgetfulness, but a creeping unease settled in my chest. Over the following weeks, strange things escalated. I would see him at night, seemingly watching me from across the street. Occasionally, objects in my yard would be moved, my garden gnome shifted, flower pots rearranged. Notes appeared under my door with short, cryptic messages. I know your routine, you can't hide, I'm closer than you think. The handwriting was neat, precise, almost clinical. Whoever was leaving them knew intimate details about my life that no casual observer could have noticed. Then came the real terror. One morning, I went over to introduce myself properly and found his house empty. Doors locked, lights off, no sign of life. I asked other neighbors about him, and everyone acted strangely. Some claimed he had never lived there, others insisted he had been there for decades. But no one had any clear memory of seeing him recently. It was as if he had vanished without a trace, leaving no explanation, no forwarding address. The more I investigated, the more I realized something deeply disturbing. His presence never left. Even though his house appeared abandoned, I would catch glimpses of movement in the shadows when passing by. Lights would flicker briefly at night, and I would feel an icy chill when walking near his property. Occasionally, I received cryptic messages again, this time left in odd places, taped to my mailbox, slipped under the garden gate, even etched faintly into the frost on my windows. Each message was simple, terrifying, and utterly deliberate. I am still here. The climax came one stormy evening. I returned home to find a figure standing silently in my driveway. Lightning flashed, revealing him, Mr. Whitaker, exactly as I remembered. My knees went weak. I stumbled back, but when I approached the spot again, he was gone, leaving only a faint, chilling whisper that seemed to echo in my ears, "You can't run." Panic consumed me. I realized then that he had never truly left. His vanishing was not a disappearance, it was a tactic, a way to make me question reality while he continued watching. Terrified, I packed my essentials and moved immediately. Even now, years later, I still feel the weight of being watched. shadows in the periphery of my vision, strange movements outside windows, and the occasional cryptic note make me question whether he ever truly left. Some neighbors, I've learned, are not just next door, they exist in the margins of your life, invisible yet omnipresent, patient, and dangerous. The most chilling part? I've moved several times since, yet the feeling persists. I know, somewhere, Mr. Whitaker is watching someone else, waiting, studying, and disappearing at will. And I realize that some neighbors never really leave, they just vanish, leaving a void that can terrify anyone unlucky enough to come next. When I moved into my townhouse in a quiet suburb of New Jersey, I was looking for peace and stability. The streets were clean, the lawns well kept, and everyone seemed polite and friendly. My next-door neighbor, a woman named Elaine, initially seemed like the perfect neighbor, smiling, always courteous, and never intrusive. But the truth is, sometimes even the kindest-looking neighbors hide secrets that are darker than anything you could imagine. At first, our interactions were minimal but pleasant. She would wave when we passed each other, offer a friendly smile, and sometimes leave small treats at my doorstep, like cookies or flowers. I thought it was sweet. But soon, I noticed little things that unsettled me. She seemed to know my schedule. She would be outside at exactly the same time I was leaving for work, standing silently, her gaze fixed in my direction. I brushed it off as coincidence, until the first note appeared. It was handwritten, slipped under my door, with her unmistakable handwriting, "You were late this morning. I saw you." My stomach sank. How could she possibly know that? I hadn't mentioned my schedule to anyone, not even my closest friends. A cold wave of dread washed over me. I began paying closer attention, realizing she was watching me far more than any ordinary neighbor would. The notes continued, growing increasingly personal and unsettling. She described things only someone observing me closely could know: the book I was reading, the clothes I wore each day, even small conversations I had in my own home. At first, I tried to laugh it off, convincing myself she was just being friendly, but the invasive nature of the messages made it clear this was something much darker. Then came the voice. Late at night, I would hear soft whispers outside my bedroom window, a faint voice calling my name. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but the whispers grew clearer, more deliberate, sometimes even repeating private phrases I had said aloud in my apartment. My sense of safety eroded quickly, and I began to feel trapped in my own home. I tried confronting her, asking directly how she knew so much about me. She smiled, calm and composed, saying only, "I like to keep track of my neighbors. It's a kindness." Her words sent chills down my spine. I realized that reasoning with her was impossible. She had been watching, learning, and planning her influence over my life in silence, and she enjoyed the power she held. Things escalated further. One morning, I returned from work to find a note taped to my front door: "You can't hide from me. I know where you are, always." Panic surged through me. I began installing cameras and motion sensors around my townhouse, trying desperately to document her actions. The footage revealed her lurking at the edges of my property, sometimes crouched in the shadows, watching silently as I came and went. The breaking point came one stormy night. I had just returned home late, drenched from the rain, and was about to enter my apartment when I heard my name called, clear and deliberate. I froze, my heart pounding. From the corner of my eye, I saw her silhouette in the shadows, Elaine, standing perfectly still, her eyes fixed on me, unblinking. I tried to confront her, but the moment I took a step forward, she vanished as if swallowed by the darkness. I packed my belongings immediately and moved to another state, hoping distance would sever her influence over me. Even now, years later, I feel her presence sometimes, the fleeting shadow in the corner of my vision, the inexplicable chill in an empty room, the faint sense of being watched. Elaine taught me that some neighbors aren't just people who live next door, they are predators in plain sight, patient, calculating, and terrifyingly attentive. The most haunting part? I know she didn't stop with me. Somewhere, she is observing another unsuspecting neighbor, learning their habits, calling their name when they least expect it, and reminding them that privacy is a fragile illusion. And I realize now that some neighbors aren't just next door, they are inside your life, quietly controlling it, knowing everything about you, and waiting for the perfect moment to remind you just how powerless you are. I had always believed that moving to a quiet neighborhood in suburban Illinois would bring peace. After years of city life, constant noise, crowded streets, and strangers everywhere, I was desperate for calm. The neighborhood seemed perfect, tree-lined streets, well-kept lawns, and neighbors who smiled politely but mostly kept to themselves. I thought I was safe. That illusion ended the moment I met my next-door neighbor, Mr. Sullivan. At first, he seemed entirely normal. A man in his late 50s, tall and thin, always impeccably dressed, and with an easy, polite smile. He would wave as I took out the trash or returned from work. Occasionally, he would stop for small talk, asking about my day or offering advice about the neighborhood. I appreciated his friendliness, even if it felt a little too constant. The first sign that something was wrong appeared one night while I was brushing my teeth. I looked up and, through the reflection in my bathroom mirror, caught a glimpse of Mr. Sullivan's window across the street. A shadow moved, and for a moment, I thought I saw him staring directly at me. When I glanced outside, there was nothing, curtains drawn, lights off. I dismissed it as a trick of the reflection, a trick of my tired mind. But then the feeling of being watched began to creep into my daily life. I started noticing little things. Curtains slightly shifted when I returned home, faint shadows flitting across my peripheral vision, and objects that seemed to have moved without explanation. Then the notes began. They were always short, cryptic, and left in places I couldn't imagine he had access to, taped to my door, tucked inside my mailbox, even slipped under my car windshield wiper. I see you, one read. Do not ignore me, another. The handwriting was neat, precise, unsettlingly calm. It wasn't just the notes. I began seeing him everywhere. Across the street, in the park, even sometimes in my own yard when I thought I was alone. His presence was silent, unassuming, but intensely observant, like a predator watching prey without ever making a sound. The reflection in his window became my nightly terror. Every time I glanced across the street, I felt his eyes on me, even if I couldn't catch him directly. One night, around midnight, I was woken by a faint tapping at my window. My heart raced as I pulled back the curtain. There he was, perfectly still, staring at me. I could see the faint outline of his face in the dim streetlight, his expression calm, almost serene, but utterly terrifying. I froze, unable to move, and then, almost imperceptibly, he lifted a finger to his lips, a silent warning, a command. The tapping stopped. The window was still. And yet, I could feel him watching, even though he had disappeared moments later. Desperate to understand what was happening, I began documenting everything, times he appeared, notes, shadows, reflections. The more I observed, the more I realized he was studying me, learning my habits, predicting my routines. The terror was compounded by the thought that no matter what I did, I could never truly know when he was watching or what he was capable of. The reflection in his window became my obsession and my curse. The climax came one stormy night. Lightning illuminated his window, and I saw him, standing perfectly still, staring, unblinking. I felt my breath catch in my throat as he slowly raised a hand and pointed directly at me. I stumbled backward, tripping over my rug, heart hammering. Then, as the storm raged outside, I saw something in the reflection that I will never forget. My own reflection was slightly delayed, and in it, I was frozen, staring at him, but my reflection was smiling. Smiling in a way I wasn't. I don't remember how I got to bed that night. Sleep was impossible. In the following days, I tried to avoid looking at his window, but every time I glanced, I saw him there, perfectly still, and always, in the reflection, my smile remained even when I wasn't smiling. The thought that he could manipulate the reflection of my own life, turning it into something alien, haunted me endlessly. Eventually, I moved. I thought distance would free me. But even now, years later, I find myself checking reflections in shop windows, mirrors, and even my computer screen. Sometimes, I swear I see him, just for a fraction of a second, smiling faintly, waiting, patient. I know now that some neighbors aren't just next door, they infiltrate your reality, manipulate what you see, and leave you questioning what is real. The final, most terrifying realization is this: the reflection in his window wasn't just a mirror of my life. It was a warning. Some neighbors don't just observe, they can change the way you see yourself, and once you've glimpsed it, there is no one doing it. I am never alone. He is still out there, somewhere, silently watching, waiting for the next reflection, the next opportunity to step into someone else's life.